Good afternoon and welcome to this live broadcast from COP26. My name is James Kelloway. I'm the Energy Intelligence Manager from National Grid ESO, and it's my privilege to be able to talk to you today about carbon intensity. I'd like to start with a quote. I first met a gentleman called Tony Juniper at the World Wildlife Fund a number of years ago when we started looking at carbon intensity, and he said something to me that has stayed with me ever since, which is, we are the very first generation to understand climate change, and we're also the very last to be able to do anything about it. That made a profound difference to me that particular day, and my team and I have worked extremely hard to raise awareness and also the usage of carbon intensity to make sure that we use power when it's at its most cleanest. Next slide, please. So for each of us, I think climate change may mean something slightly different. To me, it's in this diagram. I can see very clearly where we're headed. If we don't do anything, it's not looking too great. But also, you can see very clearly too what that means in terms of a personal timeline. And I'd advocate everyone plots their stuff against this sort of chart, because it tells me that by the time my son retires, actually, if we haven't solved the climate problem, we are in a very, very serious situation indeed. Next slide, please. So where have we come from? Well, I found a really great quote from 1912, and it talks about the dire warning of burning so many billions of tons of coal and the fact that that can actually have an impact on climate by putting a gentle warming blanket around it. That was 1912. That was the year that the Titanic sank. We do not have another 109 years to think about doing something about that. That moment has long since gone. But when we look at the global warming statistics, we see the top right-hand chart there, and when we look at the amount of carbon dioxide that's in our atmosphere, the science is very clear and unequivocal. We have to act now. Next slide, please. So let's now take this into our area of expertise, which is that of electricity. Electricity is the lifeblood of our country and of much of our world. Decarbonising this is the main way that we can help tackle and solve the climate crisis. Next slide, please. So within National Grid ESO, we have a really important role, which is we essentially balance moment for moment what the supply in the country requires and what the demand is. So effectively the two balance, right? And our ladies and gentlemen in the control centre do this second by second, and they do it very well. What we are trying to do now, and we are doing this, is we are looking at decarbonising that electricity. So we've got two really ambitious targets, one of which is that by 2025 we will be able to operate the electricity system in the GB with zero carbon on the transmission grid, and by 2035 we'll be able to do that sustainably. Next slide, please. So here's the story of that so far. I'm a numbers guy. I wrote my first computer program when I was about 6, and I absolutely love numbers. These are the numbers for carbon intensity. They tell us that as an industry, and that's not just National Grid, it's right across the power industry within GB, we have happily decarbonised 64% from 2013 to now. As you can see in the trend, it's kind of levelled off a little bit. What's actually caused that? How has that been achieved? Well, the downward part of that chart was where we took a lot of coal generation off the system. Coal is quite a carbon-intensive fuel to make electricity. And the other is with really significant rises in renewable generation, specifically solar and wind. So solar has risen to around about 13 gigawatts on the system. Wind is currently at about 23 and is continuing to increase. Next slide, please. So let's just think about how electricity is made for a moment, because every action we take with a piece of electricity has a carbon impact at the moment. So if I take a very simple example, like I'm going to run a hairdryer. I mean, probably not me running a hairdryer, but you do run a hairdryer. That will have a carbon impact depending on what fuel makes that power. So on the chart that I'm showing you there, the big grey blob is how much carbon will be released if it's from coal. The little tiny bottom right hand corner is if that's coming from hydro from Norway, that's how much carbon will be needed, if you like, for that same action. So by choosing what we make our electricity with, and critically when we use our power, we can really make a very large difference to the carbon footprint we have. Next slide, please. So let's now take a look at what's been going on this year. This year is a record-breaking year for carbon intensity, so we saw our lowest ever carbon intensity nationally for GB back in April. That was down at 39 grams per kilowatt hour. That's as low as we've ever got on the system since it was put into operation. I'll talk a little bit more about exactly what allows those sorts of events to happen. But suffice to say, we need to get that right down to a sustainable zero. And the closer we get to zero, the harder the problem gets. Next slide, please. So one of the real advantages of being up in Scotland, which is an absolutely beautiful country to be visiting, is that Scotland is actually a net renewable exporter. What does that mean? It means it has more renewable energy than it actually needs to consume. So it actually manages to feed lots of energy down from Scotland to help the rest of the GB decarbonise. What I've got on the screen here at the moment are the comparative carbon intensities for Scotland on the top, and then England and Wales underneath. As you can see, the carbon intensity is low sometimes, and sometimes it's quite high. Why is that? One thing to really note about bringing renewables online is that when it's sunny or when it's windy, they're absolutely awesome in isolation. When it's dark, which it is at least half the time, so this time of year slightly longer, or when it's not windy, actually those renewables do not produce power, so we need to backfill them with something. And at the moment, the way the infrastructure is set up, that has to be fossil fuel and nuclear predominantly. So it just gives you an idea of how the carbon intensities change across the different countries. Next slide, please. But it's not all doom and gloom. You know, if I look at Scotland, for example, Scotland has had a really, really good track record when it comes to renewable exporting. In fact, it's managed to run at zero carbon for, I think it's 22 episodes of 25.5 hours since 2021. And that is a really good thing. You know, that's something we want to be able to do nationally by 2025 onwards. So from that perspective, Scotland as a region is doing that really well. The longest episode of that was actually 5 hours, and that was only last month. So these records and these things are changing rapidly. What's really important to note, though, is that it's only able to do that because it's connected to the rest of the mainland GB electricity grid. The rest of that grid gives that part of the network the stability to be able to operate in that way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. With our carbon intensity model, we measure essentially how much carbon is released per megawatt or kilowatt hour. And within any model, there's a margin of error. The really interesting thing here is if I take a margin of error of just 5 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, we could actually say that this year alone, Scotland has exceeded 600 hours of zero carbon electricity already, which is an awesome achievement. Next slide, please. So what's made up our energy to date? So the pie chart's up to date as of a couple of days ago, and this actually tells you what has actually fueled electricity in GB so far this year. And there are a number of principal fuels, which I'm sure we're all aware of. There's gas, there's wind, there is solar, there is nuclear, there's also biomass, there's also hydroelectricity. In fact, we've even got in the north of Scotland, I believe, a tidal plant on the system up and running. So there are lots and lots of different types of homegrown assets that make power, but also we have interconnectors which bring in power from the continent when it's in excess or when the market conditions dictate. That's really important too, because a lot of that is low carbon intensity power. So if I take the French interconnector, for example, that's typically well under 100 grams per kilowatt hour. And if I look at the Norwegian interconnector, which has recently gone live, we're looking at probably upwards of 95 to 97% of that being purely generated from hydro, so essentially zero carbon fuel coming into GB. So interestingly at the moment, it's kind of on a knife edge in terms of how far we are through the year so far, but more fossil fuel has been used than zero carbon power, but not by very much. Actually, that's pretty close. We'd like to get to a scenario where actually we see much more renewable power on the system. The picture in the bottom right is actually quite interesting. That's where the ladies and gentlemen in the control centre actually work their magic, where they balance what we require as a nation versus what has actually been supplied from the generators, and make sure that all works for us in very fine tolerances. So I thought I'd include that picture in there just to give you some idea of what that actually looks like. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, each fuel on the system has a consequence. So I took this this pie chart at about 7 o'clock this morning on purpose, because it's before solar comes up. Okay, and what you can see there is over half of the megawatts on the system for all across GB are driven from natural gas. Okay, but what's interesting is that it's looking like over 80% of the emissions are actually from those megawatts. So it's really important to note that actually it matters a great deal which fuel you use when generating power if we want to get to net zero. Next slide, please. So how do we just do net zero? I spoke to my 8-year-old daughter Jenny, and she came home from school and she said, "Daddy, I'm really upset because I can't actually fix the planet." I said, "Why can't you?" She said, "Well, I'm pink and not green." And I said, "No, don't worry about that. Actually, we can fix the planet." But she said, "Well, why don't you just stop burning fossil fuel right now?" And that's a really good question. I always love a question from someone who's 8, because they level you quite well. There are a number of reasons we can't just switch off fossils right now. It's the stability and voltage, so how much the frequency wobbles around. So if you try and visualize this for the non-engineers that are listening, it's a bit like riding a bicycle. Pretend you're pedaling 50 times a second. When you come to a hill, that will slow down unless you increase power. When you come down a hill, it will get faster as you take power off. Okay, so we need to keep that within a very, very fine tolerance. So we need to think how that works, also how voltage works. Think of that like pressure in a plumbing system. It's the thing that enables you to actually transmit the power. Constraints is another one to think about. Wonderful technical term, but actually it's how much cable have you got to plug stuff in. So for example, if I've got 2 wind turbines and I've only got a cable capable of taking 1, I can only run them at half each or 1 at a time. I can't run both of them at the same time with that 1 cable because the cable will simply overheat. So we have constraints to think about. That could be solved with batteries on site at wind farms. That could also be solved by building extra cabling to enable that power to be transmitted into the system, but it's something to think about. The level of zero carbon generators we actually have available from the market to use is very important. The cost of this to the consumer. You know, obviously gas prices right now and electricity prices are high for general consumers, and that's duly noted. But also we need to think about the system security as well. So how secure is that system if there's a fault, if there's an issue? Yeah, because we need to rely on that power being available all the time. Weather plays a really important role. So why weather? Well, if you think of the grid in the older days, it was designed primarily to have a small number of very large power stations, typically fossil plants, that would distribute energy throughout the nation. Today that setup's very different. We have, in the case of including rooftop solar, things like that, we literally have millions of generators feeding in many different ways across that grid. So weather plays a really, really important role in what that does, and as obviously we know here in Scotland, the weather is perfectly stable all the time. So it's only when all of those things come together are we able to operate the electricity grid zero carbon. And it's a challenge we're up for, but it's a big problem to tackle. Next slide, please. So what could we do as individuals? What could we do as consumers? There are different carbon intensities at different times of day. The very simple example would be that at night there's no solar, it's dark. Yeah, but actually that doesn't necessarily mean the carbon intensity is higher, because the demand is also less at night. So we rely more on the base load, which is actually predominantly nuclear at the moment. So by time shifting when you perform your action, you can actually save a bunch of power. Now the example I've given here is of a dishwasher with a simple timer on it. Okay, so if you turn that on at say in the afternoon, perhaps you're running quite high carbon, hundreds of grams per kilowatt hour. If you were to actually time that and do that at a different time at night, you could save quite a significant portion of carbon for that same action. And certainly we have ways of communicating when that should be to you. So next slide, please. So the ESO, for example, has a great app you can use. It's entirely free. It's in the Apple and Android stores, and it will allow you to essentially see ahead of time when the cleanest time to use power is. Now, whether that's to charge your electric vehicle like I do, or whether that is to run your dishwasher, run your tumble dryer, whatever that may be. Next slide, please. Oh, but what else can you do? It's about choosing, you know, what you use it for and when you use it. So it's really important that you do have power available. That's absolutely critical, and you always will do. But I think the important thing here to think about is that if you can choose when you use that power, depending on the weather, it can actually genuinely help. So if it's sunny or if it's windy, use the power. The odds are that will be a lower carbon intensity than when it's not windy and sunny. That's a really great time to think about using the power. Next slide, please. So just to recap then, so since 2013, the energy industry has decarbonised around about 64%. Okay, we're not there yet. We've made a huge impact on the amount of carbon that's released as a result of generating electricity for GB, but we're not there yet. Between 2021 and 2035, we've got to get from the position where we're averaging in the 180s to averaging 0. It's a hard challenge, but it's one that's absolutely necessary if we're going to tackle climate change. Next slide, please. So just to take us back to where we started about the timeline, you know, we're here at COP26 in 2021. You know, we're going to be running the grid zero carbon for the first time in 2025. Hopefully 2035 we'll see that sustainably out, and then maybe negative after that. Just take a look at that chart. If we do not achieve that, then we're going to be in the upper regions of those climate scenarios, which are pretty scary. So with that, I'd like to thank you for having a listen. We're going to play a short video now, and then I'm going to be back with a friend and carbon intensity colleague of mine, Isabella O'Dowd from the World Wildlife Fund, where we'll be answering some of your questions from Slido, and also having a chat about the broader range of carbon intensity issues. And welcome back live at COP26 in the Green Zone. I am absolutely privileged and delighted to be joined by a carbon intensity friend of mine, Isabella O'Dowd. Isabella, welcome to the National Grid stand. Thank you for coming and joining us.
Thanks, James.
Really appreciate it. Full disclosure here, Isabella and I actually met a few years ago when we started inventing how this carbon intensity stuff should work. And I know I certainly really enjoyed working on the project with you, and it's really great to sort of see you here today with us now that it's so widely used. Isabella, tell us about what you're doing at WWF and some of the things you're up to.
Thank you, James, and it's great to be here. The carbon intensity tool was actually one of the first projects that I worked on when I joined WWF 4 years ago. I'm now head of climate at WWF, and this year have been working really hard to get the UK government to put in plans how to achieve net zero, and to make sure they show that credibility ahead of this important COP26 conference.
That's great. Well, it's really wonderful to have you with us. So, as we were talking through the previous slide deck, we're talking about many of the sustainability challenges that we face decarbonising. How are we doing? What can we do better?
Yeah, so it was great to see in your presentation. I love that graph that shows how the carbon intensity has changed over time. We're seeing that reduce. And we know in order to get on track to meet our climate promises and to achieve net zero in the UK, we do need to decarbonise our power sector. So we need to see a lot more renewables on the system in order to kind of make that achievement as the government has set by 2035. So we know we need to rapidly decrease the power system. And for us at WWF, this is so important because of the difference every half degree makes. So whilst we're here at Glasgow for COP26, I think the biggest fact that's always really stuck with me is the difference in a 2-degree world when you get rid of all coral reefs versus a 1.5 degree world where you still lose up to 70% of coral reefs. So it's really, really critical that we're acting now and that we're moving the power sector into that decarbonisation pathway. So for me, it's great that we have the technology. We know that fossil fuels need to be removed from the system, and actually renewable energy is one of the cheapest forms of power. And for us, seeing the gas prices that we've seen recently, we need to move away from our reliance on fossil fuels and move to that lower carbon, renewable future that has benefits in terms of job creation, but also the impacts in terms of climate change. I actually looked at the app yesterday and saw that wind and solar were producing almost half of Great Britain's electricity, which is really, really great to see. And I actually use the app regularly to time my washing machine to make sure I'm putting it on at those lower carbon moments to try and shift that demand. But in order to get there, we really need to see governments invest in the infrastructure to unlock that renewable energy future. So we need to see the policies and the frameworks and in place for that transition. And here at COP26, we're really looking at leaders to make sure they keep their climate promises. Because for us at WWF, future generations really won't forgive if we don't manage to get on track and mitigate those risks against climate change.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so important, isn't it? I mean, one of the reasons, I mean, whenever I talk about carbon intensity, I always start with that slide of what it means to me and what those things are. And I always look at the big red bit at the top thinking, if we do nothing, that's when my children will be retiring. And I'm like, that's within my lifetime. You know, if I don't do my bit now and we don't collectively as a society do our bit now, we cannot achieve fixing this problem. And that will leave a very different world. I mean, one of the things I find quite hard to articulate to people is the difference between half a degree. It really doesn't sound a lot, does it?
Yeah, it really is quite hard to imagine what half a degree looks like. And for us, you know, it's a really critical, every half degree really matters. It's having significant impacts on the climate and the biodiversity and nature around us. And we're seeing the impacts of that extreme weather and climate change across the world. So we're seeing it in the fires. We've seen it here in the UK with the floods. I know lots of people had issues getting up to COP26 because of flooding. So we really, really need to get on track to that 1.5 degree world in order to make sure we're limiting those impacts as much as possible.
That's awesome. Should we see if there's any questions go through on the Slido?
That'd be great.
Let's have a look. So, so yeah, it's wonderful to be here, having the opportunity to do this. Sorry, technology is killing me. Bear with. Right, here we go. Okay, so we've got the first question here. It's from a person called Jordan. One of the major considerations for electricity generation for the future is energy storage. Which options are the most effective being developed now? Oh, I recognise that look. I think that one's for me, isn't it? Okay.
I could give a basic answer.
Yeah. So there are a number of storage options being developed at the moment, and each have got really different characteristics, and each solve different problems. So there are. Let's start with what we already have and have had for a long time, which is pump storage. Okay, so this is essentially where you have two lakes, and one's high up, one's low down, and when you've got too much power, be that renewable power or otherwise, you pump it to the top, and then you let the water come down and make power on its way down. That's a really good way of actually controlling that, and that's pretty quick. You can go from nothing to full chat in about 40 seconds, somewhere around there. Then you get to your battery technology, and this is probably the one that we're more familiar with, and it's certainly talked about more at the moment. Your battery technology is there, and its main sort of value add, if you like, is that it's really fast acting. I mean, really, really fast. So essentially, if you make a very small change very quickly, actually you don't need to make a massive change more slowly. So certainly when paired, certainly I look at the solar and battery installation in homes. When paired with solar farms, wind farms at scale, actually that has a lot of ability to do stuff. Yeah, let's try and find one for you. You mentioned that policy and frameworks are going to be needed to decarbonise the grid. What are we hoping to see?
That is a very good question. I used to be a policy expert in power, but have moved into net zero climate, so I might be a bit rusty on this. But one of the biggest things for me is just really making sure we're investing in the grid infrastructure that we need to see. So I think from James's presentation, seeing some of those examples, particularly in Scotland, where we've gone to a really low carbon intensity powered by renewables, we need to make sure that the grid is fit for that. So that's kind of looking at sort of regulation, looking at investing in the grid to make sure it's ready for that transition, but also making sure that we're not subsidizing and financing fossil fuels. That's one of the biggest things for me, is we really need to focus on that shift to renewable energy. It's one of those ones, we know the technologies, they're here. I'm a particular fan on solar power, as James knows. So making sure that we're not sort of subsidizing fossil fuels, and we're really kind of helping that transition to make sure renewable power is the best option out there.
Wonderful, thank you, Isabella. Okay, so here's a question that I think we could probably both answer, which is what incentives are there to put solar panels on our roof now that feed-in tariffs are removed? I can actually speak from personal experience. I've literally just ordered a new solar and battery setup for my house at home. So what I'm finding is that the actual export tariffs aren't massive. So the systems need to be designed primarily to meet your consumption at home, to be economical. However, there is a lot of green finance available, which means from your mortgage companies, you can get relatively easily sub 1% rates to actually pay for those installations. The other thing that I've noticed is that in recent years the cost of implementation has come down significantly, and I'm sure Isabella has got some better examples than I on that. But for literally under £10,000, you can get a decent sized solar and battery install now, whereas a few years ago I think that was a little bit different, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the cost of that technology has come down dramatically. And for us at WWF, it's really kind of looking at how do we unlock that so that more people can access it. And Solar Energy UK has actually just published a report that looks at the value added to your home when you install solar. And I actually can't remember the top stat on it, but it does show, I recommend checking it out. It does show that it adds to the value of your property. And we're working with Scottish Power at the moment to try and look at that for other technologies such as heat pumps, electric vehicle chargers, because I think in the future we need to be looking at financing schemes that allow people to pay it back over time, like you would if you were kind of putting in a new kitchen.
Yeah.
Looking at how you could link that to your mortgage payments in order to make it more accessible for people so they're not paying for that upfront cost. Because the other great thing about renewables is the ongoing saving costs. So once you've actually paid that upfront cost to install the technology, you're saving in the long term in terms of your energy bills as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the panels I'm putting on my house, for example, I think they've got something like a 25-year performance guarantee, you know, so I know they're going to be delivering power for quite a long time into the future. So it's kind of a thing with any new technology in the market. An incentive there is there to kickstart the market, and then the price will lower as as the volume goes up, and then yeah, off to the races with it, hopefully.
And definitely, and I think Lord Deben from the Committee on Climate Change has been very vocal about we need to start looking at the true value and cost of homes. So how much are they cost to run, how efficient are they, and stuff like making them energy efficient, and also putting new technologies on like solar and storage really helps with that. So it's great in terms of, sort of unlocking those benefits, and it also has good health benefits in terms of improved warmer homes for people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just a general sort of health benefit thing. You know, during lockdown, one of the things I certainly really noticed where I was is how much clearer the air was, how much quieter and more peaceful it was, and there's a real value to that. And you know, as we come out of lockdown, I think people probably appreciate that a lot more than they did before going in.
Yeah, definitely.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. So nuclear energy, has a future, fusion, but waste needs addressing. Bill Gates was looking into ventures where it can be recycled. Is this realistic? I genuinely have not seen what Bill is doing on this particular one. What I do know is that if someone can get the tokamak, which is essentially fusion energy, to work, that will really, really help the decarbonisation right the way around the planet. For those of you who have not come across the technology, I mean, so fusion energy effectively have plasma that goes around really, really fast, and it makes more power than is put in. Magic happens. We need to cue a physicist here, I think. You know, but it's a really awesome technology if it can be made to work, and I believe that it's getting very, very close. So fingers crossed on that one, because it would be a really great way of covering it. Okay, so this is one that we might enjoy answering together. So the government says that 2035 the electricity system will be clean and green. Will it include nuclear? Do you see nuclear as green and clean also? Okay. Shall I go first on this one, or do you want to? Yeah. So we were actually talking about this particular issue before we did this panel. So it'll be quite interesting to see how this one plays out. It depends what problem you're trying to solve, right? So what we're focused on is the amount of CO2 at the point of generation. So if we ask for a megawatt to be produced to support the country, then that will actually be seen. That will actually be counted with the amount of carbon that occurs as a result of that megawatt. Now, one of the main advantages of nuclear power is that if you generate a megawatt of nuclear power, there's no actual fuel that's combusted as such, so there isn't any CO2 at the point of that release. So that's one of the major advantages. One of the major disadvantages is the nuclear waste that comes out. So with this, I'll ask Isabella to comment.
Yeah, I think for me, the waste is such a huge issue, and I think the full life costing of nuclear really needs to be addressed. I think my main point is we need to do everything we can to get to net zero, but we know wind and solar are the cheapest forms. They're significantly cheaper, and they are very clean. And we really need to be exploring and developing those storage technologies that James was talking about. So for me, you know, we really need to get to net zero, but I think there are better alternatives that are cheaper, and there has been modelling that shows you can get there without new nuclear. So it's obviously a very big debate at the moment, but yeah, for me it's very much about trying to unlock that renewable generation, and also trying to unlock those storage and flexibility technologies that can really help with that.
No, I think we completely agree on the unlocking of the flexibility and the renewables. So the last question I have here, and then we'll talk about a little bit more about our journey with carbon intensity. So the last question I have on Slido is, no gas 100% of the time by 2035 seems ambitious. Will you get penalised if you fail? I think if we fail, everyone gets penalised, is how I'd answer that. It's really, really important that we get the grid to zero carbon operation. There are a number of ways you can do that with new and emerging technologies, including carbon capture storage at scale, providing that is actual carbon capture and storage at scale. I think, yeah, if we do need to be able to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. I think that's an absolute must. If we're seeing all the price hiking and the price spiking that we're seeing at the moment in the wholesale market, it's not the renewable portion of the market that's causing that. So pulling away from that in due course, I think, would be a good thing. Isabella, anything else you'd like to add on that? Are we going to get penalised if we don't?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to look at what's happened in the past. I think your slides on the end of coal, you know,
Yeah.
Boris has been talking a lot about that. But in order to meet that, we need to decarbonise. So when we did our modelling, power, transport and heating really need to get to zero. Some of the harder sectors such as agriculture, some industry, aviation and shipping, we really need to reduce as much as possible. And then the remaining bits, we need to, you know, really unlock nature and remove the rest of that carbon through nature-based solutions and greenhouse gas removal. So I think, you know, we really need to take that bold step and commit to phasing out gas. We've seen, you know, huge developments, like you were saying, in renewable technology, and I really do think we could get to a future, and, you know, by 2035, where we don't have fossil fuels on the system and we're really low carbon and relying on renewable energy.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I just wanted to cast your memory back actually to when we first met.
Yeah.
So I remember walking into the World Wildlife Fund offices down in it is Surrey, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
well,
it's down in Surrey.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Woking.
Yeah.
And you know what? I was absolutely stunned and amazed, not only by the level of the passion of the people in there, but by this huge tree. You know, and I remember thinking, I've never seen that before anywhere. And now I look around more advanced offices, you know, displays like these, and they're everywhere. You know, I really look forward to what the next 5 and 10 years are going to look like for us, you know. But also I think back to when we first launched our carbon intensity, when we sat in the room with that whiteboard with a few of us and said, how could we make this actually work? And we're getting really excited over getting 800 hits a week. You know, I think, just for reference, I think last month saw around about 24, 25 million hits.
Wow.
Throughout GB on that system. You know, it's awesome. It's just a case of raising awareness, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And for me, that's one of the great things about the carbon intensity app is how is it being used elsewhere? So I mean, we've always had a dream that it's reported alongside the weather and the evening weather forecast, because we need more people to understand, you know, how the grid is changing, how the carbon intensity is changing throughout the day. Making sure, you know, we're trying to time our machines when the grid is low carbon, but also kind of giving that visibility. I know if you go and check out the website, you can put your postcode in and you can see the kind of breakdown of where your power is coming from, which I think is a really powerful thing for people to sort of start to understand at different times of the day, you know, how is demand, what is the demand, and where is the energy coming from in order to make that shift. But yeah, and the tree in the Living Planet Centre, I think was planted by David Attenborough.
It was.
And it's, I think it's meant to be a fig tree, so it's meant to really help with the air quality. But yeah, it's really lovely having that in the office.
No, it's great. I mean, you know, as we move through the next decade, you know, power, heat and transport will essentially start to merge, and we're certainly not the first to say that, but it's a truth, you know. So I mean, I drove to Cop in my electric car. I calculated, actually, because I'm a bit of an energy geek, I can't help it, I calculated the carbon impact I had by driving up and charging, and it's slightly less, I'm told, I was speaking to our friend Annalisa, that you would have by actually raising and eating a chicken. So so for the carbon impact of eating a chicken, I can drive my electric car from Berkshire to Scotland. So we'll leave you with that happy thought. But Isabella, it's been an absolute pleasure having you join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've been over in the Blue Zone doing a lot of the important work with the nation's leaders this morning, so I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us today. And yeah, wish you all the best for the rest of COP.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been great, being on the panel today. Thank you.
Pleasure.